Sarah is the CEO of Sheldon Kennedy Child Advocacy Centre and founder of Children's First Canada. Sarah has spent a lifetime advocating for children and children's health. Her industry expertise is invaluable and her work is truly revolutionary. Welcome, Sarah.
I'm really thrilled to be here with all of you and to be having the chance to spend some time in a room full of people who just care so passionately about caring for kids and giving young people the best opportunities in life. And so I'm really looking forward to having some time together this morning. I'm going to give a brief presentation and then I'm hoping we can have some Q&A and have some discussion as well, and spend some time together over lunch as well. For me, I've spent well over the past 20 years working professionally as an advocate for kids here in Canada and around the world. My career started on the streets of Bangkok, working as an advocate for kids enslaved in child labor and child trafficking. And my work has taken me all around the world into corridors of power in governments and boardrooms, and really helping to advocate for kids in a whole host of different venues. In the United Nations, in New York, in Geneva. And not only have I had the opportunity to speak up for children, but most importantly, giving young people the chance to speak up for themselves and to be their own hero and to be their own advocate. Over the past several years, I've had the opportunity to advocate for kids across our country, from coast to coast to coast, meeting young people from all walks of life, and again, teaching them about their rights and about the role that they can play as their own advocate. And when you do this type of work, when you work with kids, particularly young people who are suffering, kids who've experienced abuse or homelessness, or growing up in poverty, and kids who are facing hardships in life, you have a couple of choices to make, in my view. You can choose to set up some boundaries and create a wall, if you will, to protect yourself from the emotional toll that it can take to be exposed to the trauma and the suffering of children. Or you can choose to stay open-hearted to the suffering of young people. And I decided early on in my career to stay open to the suffering of children. And I was guided by the words of Dr. Bob Pierce, who said, "Let my heart be broken by the things that break the heart of God." It's difficult to stay open to the suffering of children. It really takes us to a difficult place personally, because it means we have to contend with what that means for us and suffering that we may have experienced ourselves as children, but also to engage with the suffering of another child and to see what it's like to walk in their footsteps and to be with them on that journey. But for me, the choice to stay open-hearted to the suffering of children has helped me immensely in my work to be a more effective advocate for kids, because it gives me this burning sense of urgency that every single day matters in the life of a child. Not only every day, but every hour. And that we have to work with this burning sense of urgency and to not accept that this is normal. That kids shouldn't have to be living this life the way that they are, and that we need to work with a sense of urgency, demanding better for them, and helping them to have a voice in the decisions that affect their lives. And as I look around this room, I am so inspired by all of you. You're working on the front lines, helping kids every single day, and you show up. You have good days and you have bad days, and you keep showing up and engaging with children in really, really difficult work, and caring for them and advocating for them, and really working to keep their issues on the forefront, to make these burning issues that people in our city and our province and our country need to be paying attention to. And while we all do this in different ways, some of you work in administration, some of you are in frontline, some of you are staff, some of you are volunteers, and we all have something in common, which is our common commitment to the protection and empowerment of children. And I don't know what has brought you to this point in your life, what's brought you to this point in your career, or what's brought you into this room today, but I just want us all to think about that, to think about our own journey and what got us here. Are you in the job that you dreamed of when you were a little child? Is this what you thought what your life would hold for you, or are you in quite a different place than what you imagined for yourself? I, as a 5-year-old little girl, dreamed of being a solid gold dancer. I was a child of the 70s, and the gold lame outfits and the leg warmers and the big hair had me at hello. It was very alluring for a young girl like me, but clearly my life has taken me on quite a different path. I'm not on the stage in bright lights and in a gold lame outfit.
But I don't know. I don't know about you. I don't know what brought you to your career and whether you're doing something that you dreamed of as a child. Maybe some of you are, but I would hazard a guess to say that many of us are in quite a different place than we had imagined for ourselves as little children. But we are all roles that are purpose-driven. We are all here with a clear and burning sense of passion and urgency to care for and protect children. And often purpose has, very little to do, their sense of calling and purpose has very little to do with our job title. It's a sense of calling and clarity about who you were created to be. I came across a book several years ago that really has helped to clarify this concept for me. It was a book by Parker Palmer called Listening to the Voice of Vocation. And he describes it like this: before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I must listen to my life telling me who I am. Before you can tell your life what you intend to do with it, listen for what it intends to do with you. When you look back on your life, what are the signposts in your life that point you to your sense of calling and purpose to be a hero for children, to be a champion for kids? For me, there are countless signposts in my life that have pointed me to this place. The first signpost for me began at the age of 4. I was growing up with my family in Toronto, and the year was 1979. And in the midst of my very ordinary childhood, a humanitarian crisis had broken out in Southeast Asia. It was a massive humanitarian crisis. Hundreds of thousands of people were fleeing for their lives, and Canada opened its borders, and our family opened our home, and we opened our hearts, and we welcomed a family that had 2 little boys, and they came to live with us as they settled into life in Canada, and making Canada their new home. My life got blown wide open. Here I was, this 4-year-old little girl, and all of a sudden we were living with a family and we didn't speak the same language, we didn't eat the same foods. At the service level, we had very little in common. It was a radical act of generosity on the part of my parents, and it profoundly changed my life. And I learned a really important lesson early on in childhood, that as kids don't choose the families that they're born into, they don't choose their circumstances in life, and that we all have a responsibility to look after one another's children. That it's not just me looking after my own son, and that's I'm doing my bit for the world. We have to look after each other's children. The second signpost for me popped up a few years later. I was 8 years old at the time. This is not me in the picture. My parents worked full-time jobs, and so my brother and I went to after-school program at our school. And for us, it was a great chance at the end of a busy school day to hang out with our friends and just have a bit of downtime before going home. But the school and this after-school program had a rule that really bugged me, and it was that no matter what the weather was like, we had to go out in the evening for an evening recess. Now, you all know what Canadian winters can be like. And at the time, it just didn't make sense to me. My friends and I were tired. We just wanted to hang out and just rest for a little while and just have a good time. But we were being forced to go out and spend, half an hour on a cold winter evening outside, and it didn't make sense. And so I decided to do something about it. And I rallied a group of my friends. We created protest signs and a song. And we rallied in the halls. We protested, and we demanded better. We demanded that they change the rules. And it wasn't long before my parents got a call from a really infuriated school supervisor who was quite frustrated with us and our insubordination, that we were not following the rules, that we were defying their authority, and they were quite upset. But my parents, they took a different tact, and rather than grounding me or telling me to toe the line, they spoke up for me, and they spoke with the school supervisor and said, Sarah and her friends have a point. This is a rule that is worth reconsidering, and they had my back. My parents were my champion in that moment. Lo and behold, the school changed the rule, and we were allowed to have an evening recess indoors instead of having to go outdoors. Now, I know we were not protesting for world peace. I know we were not changing massive policies and procedures, but it was a meaningful change that happened in my life and in the life of my friends. And it was a very powerful lesson for me as a child that our voices matter, and that kids, when they're given the opportunity to speak up for themselves, and when they're supported by adults who listen to them and who hear what they have to say, that kids can make amazing changes in their lives. powerful, meaningful decisions that affect their daily lives and affect their quality of life. The third signpost for me happened at the age of 16. I was working as a summer camp counselor in Muskoka, Northern Ontario, and my job was to look after 5 and 6-year-old little girls who would come to stay away camp. And I just had this amazing privilege of looking after these kids that come up, just for a stay away experience at camp, and met some amazing kids. But one very special little girl was Jenny. Jenny was, stayed with me throughout the week, had an amazing week at camp. But on the very last day, as all the kids were getting ready and packing to go home, Jenny pulled me aside and shared with me the devastating news that she had been sexually abused by her stepfather, and she was terrified to go home. For me, I was a 16-year-old girl. I was a child myself on the receiving end of really, really difficult news, and I had to report the suspected abuse to my supervisor when we made the call to Children's Aid Society. And that day I sat with Jenny. All the other kids were getting on the school buses to head home. Parents were coming to pick up their kids. And Jenny just had to sit with me that day, and we wait and wait and wait for hours. And finally, after all the kids had gone home, the Children's Aid worker showed up. And Jenny just grabbed onto me. She wouldn't let go. And they literally had to peel her off of me. And it was such a profound moment in my life as a child, trying to protect another child, and realizing that, again, kids don't choose the families that they're born into. They don't choose their circumstances in life. And they need trusted people in their life, people that they can speak to and ask for help when they need it, people who know what to do and who will take action and who will do their very best to protect them. And as a child, it was an incredible responsibility, but again, it has profoundly changed my journey in life, of listening to children and realizing that we all have a role to play as being trusted adults in the lives of children, and that we need to equip people, staff and volunteers working on the front lines, with the knowledge and skills that they need to be able to care for and protect children. Looking back on my life, there are so many signposts that I can see that have pointed to me to this point in my life of being an advocate for children. And my life was telling me who I was meant to be. When you look back on your childhood, what does your life tell you about who you are meant to be? What signposts are there from your childhood, from the friendships that you had, from your experiences throughout your life? And what insights can your parents, your siblings, your friends share with you that have pointed you to your sense of purpose and calling to be a hero, to be a champion for children? Again, I want to emphasize that your purpose and calling is not your job description. It's not your job title. We all have titles that we have to carry. But your purpose and your calling to be a hero and a champion for children is this dynamic combination of your skills, your experience, and your passion. And I want to challenge you to just get very crystal clear about your purpose as an advocate, as a hero for children. And when you're living out your purpose, you set the world on fire. You set a child's life on fire. You change things for the better for children. My sense of purpose and calling to be a champion for children has changed the trajectory of my career, because all of my decisions and actions have been guided by this desire to protect and empower kids. Sometimes the path has been clear and quite linear for me, but more often than not, it has taken me to places that I never would have imagined for myself. As I said earlier, I started my career working on the streets of Bangkok, doing research on child labor and trafficking. I went on to work all across Asia Pacific, Africa, and Latin America. In Africa, I did work on the AIDS pandemic and its impact on orphans, and particularly the impact of HIV and AIDS on girls and their vulnerability to the disease. I worked across Latin America on issues like birth registration and protection of children's rights. And all this work that I was doing on the front lines with children was creating within me this strong desire to not only to hear from children, but to give children the chance to be heard in the key decisions that would affect their lives. And so I continued my work around the world, but I also went back to school. I did my Master's in International Human Rights Law at Oxford, because I was determined to find a way that I could harness laws and policies to protect children and give them a say in the issues that affect their life. I was angry, quite honestly. I was angry and frustrated that I was meeting kids who were literally dying because their governments weren't protecting them. They weren't having access to medical care and treatment. They didn't have food, shelter, the very basic things in life that kids deserve. And we know that kids here in our own city often suffer from a similar fate. And I was just deeply angry and frustrated, and so I was fueled with a sense of desire to do something about that and to use my skills and my experience to make a difference for kids. So I went to Oxford and did my Master's of Human Rights Law. And as a part of that, I designed a new protocol that would allow children the ability to file complaints against their governments when their rights were denied. Adults had this basic right that if you as an adult had your rights violated, you could go and submit a complaint to the UN and have the right to be heard and hold your government accountable. But kids didn't have this right. And so I helped to design this new protocol and create it with input from children and youth. And then I went about the crazy process of trying to pass this law in the United Nations. It seemed like a no-brainer to me. It seemed like common sense that kids should have a say in these things and be heard by the United Nations, by the international body that was put in place to protect their rights. But sadly, that was not the case. It took 8 long years of advocating with our government here in Canada and with governments all around the world. Our government, the government of Canada, fought that law tooth and nail. Was one of the staunchest adversaries throughout the process. That was deeply disappointing to me as a Canadian. But we made unlikely bedfellows as a part of this process and managed to see the law go into force. And I had the great honor and privilege of being at the United Nations in 2014 and testifying at the UN as this law went into force, granting kids all around the world the right to file a complaint against their government when their rights were denied. I know it was revolutionary, to give kids a very basic say in the things that affect their lives and to be able to have a voice in holding their governments accountable. And for me, it just felt like long overdue. This should have happened a long time ago, decades ago, but it was a great relief that it was finally going into force. And whether you wanted to call me naive or crazy or determined, whatever it took, I was determined that kids should have this right, and I'm very honored that it now is in place and available to kids all around the world. I wanted to make a difference for kids like Jenny and other kids like her that I had met along the way whose rights had not been protected, who had not had a say in the key decisions that affected their life, and who deserved justice. And the law is now in force, and it's available to kids around the world, and it's a great tool that we can use as advocates for kids and creating mechanisms for kids to have a voice in the decisions that affect their life. Child abuse alone costs Canadians a staggering $15.7 billion a year. That's at a very bare minimum. $15.7 billion a year is the price tag for child abuse in our country. And that number is over a decade old. So, again, we can do better. We can do better for our kids, and our kids deserve radical change in their life. So, through Children First Canada over the past couple of years, we've really tried to harness the data. We've published a report in 2016 called "The Kids Are Not All Right," and harness the data really around trying to tell the story about what kids in our country are facing and holding our government accountable. And last year, we started a process of creating a Canadian Children's Charter. As many of you know, Canada has ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's been 25 years since we signed that law, and yet it's not a reality for millions of kids in our country. And we were looking for a way to take the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and engage children about knowing their rights and really highlighting what are the significant gaps. And so we looked at other jurisdictions around the world and what others had done to try and create change for kids, and we came up with this idea of a Canadian Children's Charter. So to take the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and bring it into the daily lives of children in our country, to teach kids their rights, but also to ask them what are the gaps and what are the areas of urgent action that are needed. And just in early September, we released a new report called Raising Canada, really trying to again harness the data and really put a spotlight on the major gaps that are happening for kids in our country, and to demand better for our kids. We worked with the O'Brien Institute for Public Health, the University of Calgary, who really they took existing data from StatsCan, Health Canada, public agencies that serve children, and they published it in a short and concise report, and we published it with a call to action signed by all of these heads of charities, heads of kids' hospitals, heads of major corporations, and we released it the week that kids went back to school. In one day alone, we did more than 50 media interviews. That week, more than 700 unique media stories were published on it. It is creating a groundswell for change because Canadians are outraged. This is outrageous that our kids are suffering from these things. And when Canadians hear what is actually happening, they're angry. They're calling their MPs, they're writing their letters to their Prime Minister, and they're writing their checks. They want better for our kids. And if you haven't yet seen the report, go to childrenfirstcanada.com, read the report. It's just 10 pages, sign the call to action, and be a part of this demand for change, because our kids deserve it. We called for 3 areas of action. The first was the idea of having a federal commission for children and youth, actually having somebody independent in our government whose sole job it is to listen to kids and to promote the rights of children. It's not a revolutionary concept. It's been debated and discussed for decades. The Liberal government, in fact, campaigned on the promise that they would appoint a federal commission for children and youth. It's not rocket science. It is a simple thing that our government can and should be doing, is to actually appoint a federal commission for children and youth and to do this in a timely way. We also called for a children's budget to actually see what our government is spending on children. You know, all of you who are working on the front lines with kids know that there are never enough resources for kids. We don't have enough money for the after-school programs, for the therapy, for the shelters. We just don't, we're just scraping by, let alone actually trying to see the sea change that's really needed. So we're asking our federal government to be accountable, to actually be transparent. What are they spending? What are they spending on our children? And is it actually going to evidence-based solutions for kids? I would hazard a guess to say that there's lots of money that's being spent on things that aren't evidence-based, that are not actually proven solutions. And that if we can actually have this clear and transparent tool, we will see revolutionary change in the ways that money is spent on kids. It may not actually mean spending more. It may actually just mean spending it better. The government has done it in gender-based budgeting. It's been proven to be an effective tool. Let's see it happen for our kids. And lastly, we're calling for the implementation of the Children's Charter and protection of kids' rights. These are not revolutionary concepts. The Commission for Children, a children's budget, a children's charter. But these could actually, really create the groundswell of change that we really need for kids from coast to coast to coast, and here in our own province of Alberta and here in the city of Calgary. And as I said earlier, it's created a sense of shockwaves around the country, that Canadians are surprised to be hearing these things, and they do support it. We've polled Canadians, and the vast majority support these areas of action. So we really do hope that as we go into a federal election year, and also as we head into provincial elections here in the province of Alberta, that we will actually see people making children's issues things that are on the, that we're voting on. We are actually holding our MLAs and our MPs accountable to these issues and demanding that they make these evidence-based solutions for our kids. So throughout all this work that was happening at the national level then, I came to get to know the team at the Sheldon Kennedy Child Advocacy Centre, and got to know Sheldon and the team, and just over 1 year ago I had the honour and privilege to join the organisation as their new CEO. And for me, again, it comes back to this clear sense of calling and purpose, of advocating for kids and demanding better for them, and really working with our community leaders around the care and protection of our children. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Sheldon Kennedy CAC, we bring together 5 government agencies, all of whom have a mandate around the protection of children and supporting children who've experienced child abuse. It is a really amazing multidisciplinary approach where we bring together all these supports and services together under one roof, providing the best possible care for kids who've gone through things that no child should endure. And we work with all of our government partners to provide that wraparound service delivery. It's amazing to me that this organization is only 5 years. We should have been doing this decades ago, and we know that in fact people tried to make this happen decades ago here in the city, but it is a great relief to many of us that it's finally happening, and the Child Advocacy Centre is really a powerful tool in which we can support children and youth in our community who've experienced the worst forms of sexual abuse. We're talking about sexual abuse and severe physical abuse and neglect, and really putting the best interests of children first. But it's shocking to see, what the centre has uncovered in the first 5 years. We've served more than 7,500 children in 5 years. In the first 5 years, we were seeing, on average, 125 kids a month. We're now seeing 130 new kids a month. These are kids who've experienced sexual abuse, severe physical abuse, and neglect. We are tackling with the top 15% of child abuse cases. 130 new kids every month. And we think we're just at the tip of the iceberg. We're just going through major renovations right now so that we can continue to grow and meet the increasing demands of what we think is ahead of us in the years to come. We have 120 staff on site working day in and day out, providing these care and support that kids desperately need in a timely and efficient way. And not only are we ending the cycle of abuse early, we are helping to bring perpetrators to justice and prevent future abuse from happening. The centre really helps to, we provide, at our centre, we have everything from the initial triage, where we bring all the professionals together in one place to learn about what's happened in the life of a child and make decisions, to providing the ongoing wraparound care and support that they need, everything from therapy, their medical exam, preparation for court. It really brings everything together under one roof and acting in the best interest of children. But we know right now that more than 90% of children never disclose their abuse as a child. 90% never disclose as a child. And so they carry that with them into adulthood and continue to carry that toll with them, to carry that secret. And so we're really working to do whatever we can to give kids the courage to speak out, to find a trusted adult in their life that they can disclose to, working with people, teachers, other frontline workers throughout the city to support them with the knowledge and skills they need. And we really believe that through this increasing case, we see, while the numbers are shocking, 130 new kids every month, we see that as a good news story. It means that kids are speaking up, and it means that adults who suspect abuse are reporting it. And so we continue to believe that that's a good news story. It's heart-wrenching work, but it's immensely gratifying to see that the kids are getting the help, that the abuse is ending, and they're getting the support that they need in a timely and effective way. And I think an important part of all of this is really trying to change the story about child abuse, really trying to take something that's hidden in the shadows for far too long and really put a public spotlight on these issues and change the public's understanding of child abuse, rather than just seeing it as a one-off incident, to really see it as an issue of trauma that affects a child's trajectory in life. It affects their physical and mental health, it affects their long-term outcomes as adults, and that it's really important that we end the cycle of abuse early and that we prevent it in the first place. And so we are really proud over the past month to officially declare that October was Child Abuse Prevention Month in the province of Alberta, and to engage in a really high-profile campaign in our community, really trying to tell Calgarians, Albertans, Canadians, that this is an issue that affects 1 in 3 Canadians, and this needs to change. Our kids deserve better, and that we can support kids in keeping kids safe. We've launched a new toolkit for schools around the role of educators in keeping kids safe just over a year ago. We've just launched a new online program called Being Trauma Aware. It's just a short 2-hour course that you can do online. It's free. We hope you'll take it if you haven't yet done it, and where we really are hoping anyone working on the front lines with kids becomes trauma aware, understands what child abuse looks like, what child maltreatment is, and the impacts on a child's life, but also what we can all do as practitioners in responding and keeping our kids safe. Schools and workplaces like you're in are our first lines of defense. Kids need to be able to hear from us, to have trusted adults that they can disclose to, and that they have the confidence that when they come forward that they will be believed and supported. And we really believe that we are changing the story for thousands of children, and that this will change their trajectory in life. Brene Brown puts it this way: owning our story can be hard, but it's not nearly as difficult as spending our lives running from it. Embracing our vulnerabilities is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love, belonging, and joy, the experiences that make us the most vulnerable. It's only when we're brave enough to explore the darkness that we will discover the power of our infinite light. Each of you possesses your own unique skills, passion, talent, and experience. And when you tap into those superpowers, amazing things will happen in the lives of children. They already are. And I encourage you, as you continue on your journey, to continue to hone those superpowers for kids. We live in a very dark world sometimes, and every day we are confronted with the horrors of child abuse and poverty and the devastating toll that it can take on children. But when we live out that sense of calling and purpose, we can set the world on fire. Children don't choose the families they're born into, but we all have a role to play in looking out for each other's children. They say that it takes a village to raise a child, but I believe it takes a nation to raise a nation. Melinda Gates puts it this way: let's insist from this day forward that every baby born is a promise kept. Thank you for the courageous work that you do every single day to care for and protect children, to listen to them, and to help them speak up for themselves. Together we are raising Canada. Thank you so much.